Welcome back to One Piece Explained. Chapter 1169 confirms a few of the theories that we've held throughout this arc, and brings us even closer to learning what exactly the forbidden fruit of Elbaph is. There's a lot to talk about, so let's get right into it, and we start off with an amazing color spread this week with Oda giving us an ensemble piece of the Rocks Pirates. We don't get spreads without any Straw Hats very often, with the last ones I can recall being the Vegapunk spread during the Egghead arc, and the spread of Kaido's crew during Wano, so this is definitely a treat in and of itself. But this is also our first time seeing Oda's colors for many of these characters. Kaido, Whitebeard, Big Mom, Stussy, and Shiki all come as no surprise, and we recently got Zebek's color scheme just several weeks ago on the cover of Shonen Jump issue 52, though I guess you could say we're seeing the color of his furred cape for the first time here with this dark blue shade. We did get some specks of blue in his cape in that Shonen Jump cover, but it's much more apparent here. Wang Ji, Marlin, Kyo, and Barbell's hair colors are all brand new, however, and for Barbell in particular, it seems the color of his skin is a bit paler as well, relative to the purple hue that was used in the anime during his appearance at God Valley. As for everyone else, it seems what Oda had in mind was not aligned with what the anime or the digital colored manga by Shueisha had used in their prior portrayals. Gansui seems to have a reddish-brown hair, despite being previously assumed to have black. Similarly, Struzan was also depicted in the anime with dark hair in his younger days, but it seems it's actually supposed to be purple, which is the color that John's hair has been portrayed as for years, but here we see it as a gray or white. Gloriosa also had been shown with pinkish red hair in other media, but it looks like it's much closer to the blonde here in this color spread. This is not too big of a deal, as there have always been inconsistencies between what Oda intends and what the anime or other media settles on. Most recently, we saw this with the cover of Volume 110, where Oda decided Jupiter's hair was actually white, despite the anime portraying it as blonde for over a decade. Now of note, Gilbastar is the only other named Rocks pirate that was not included in this color spread. I wonder if his status of being originally from one of Oda's prior works made Oda hesitant to put any more spotlight on him than necessary. After all, he was the only Rocks pirate to not get a formal introduction in this flashback. I love the look of the spread, with a very dramatic use of watercolor outlined by the blood red border. Everyone being dressed in black suits is a great touch, really evoking the idea of them being a group of criminals. Oda's drawn similar color spreads before with the Straw Hats and all black suits, but compositionally, this is very reminiscent of the bonus color spread from Volume 8 that later got updated to include all of the Straw Hats in Chapter 1060. This chapter is titled My Death Cannot Come Soon Enough, as we come to find out that Harald was seeking his own death in an attempt to prevent Emu from conquering Elbaph through his proxy. Harald's circumstance in this chapter is a bit of a twist on Loki's earlier in the flashback, as he also sought out his own demise, but was unable to attain it for his great strength. We pick back up at Gaban's house, seemingly just after the scene from 1152, where Shanks and Gaban reminisce in the bath about their days as a crewmate on Roger's ship. Gaban reveals to Shanks that Roger actually had a son, a secret that was divulged to him by one of the only people who would have known that information at the time, Garp. Recall that Roger entrusted Garp with his unborn son's safety after he turned himself into the Marines 24 years ago, which means Garp and Gaban must have come in contact at some point during the decade between then and the current time in the flashback, which is taking place 14 years prior to present day. And for some additional context, Ace would have already been in the East Blue by this point, as we saw him under Dodon's care as an infant 22 years ago in Chapter 0, and to be even more precise, he and Sabo would be in their third year of saving money to purchase a pirate ship. Now of note, it does seem like neither Shanks nor Gaban know of anything beyond Roger's son existing, such as what his name is, where he's being raised, or anything like that. I see this as pretty crucial, as it helps prevent any potential plot holes or lines of questioning where one could ask why Shanks or Gaban did not do anything to prevent Ace's execution at Marineford, as the answer would just be that they were not aware of his connection to Roger until it was announced to the world by Sengoku on that day. Now I know that one of the Ace novels suggests that Shanks realized who Ace was during their meeting on the Grand Line, but the canon status of the novels are highly debated, and Oda's contributions and the extent of his oversight cannot really be confirmed. They are not unlike the Vivre cards, which hold quote-unquote canonical information that often turns out to be incorrect. Now, there have long been theories that Shanks had been seeking out Roger's son with the intent of making him the next king of the pirates, a possibility that he actually mentioned in this chapter, with some even going as far as speculating that the Gum Gum fruit was actually intended for Ace, and others rationalizing that Shanks spent so much time in the East Blue because he believed that Ace was there. And I suppose these are all possible to some degree, although we know that Shanks had been in the East Blue for various reasons long before he found out about Roger's son, as in Chapter 0, we see him lope town for Roger's execution, and on the coast of the Gecko Islands when he went to recruit Yasopp. It's interesting that Shanks views Ace as a younger sibling, as it means he also views himself as Roger's son, and Gaban confirms this relationship is mutual from his perspective as well, since Shanks and Buggy effectively grew up on the ship. Now, back in 1152, when we first saw this scene, Gaban had called Shanks a child of fate, which I suppose was in reference to his unique position as a celestial dragon turned pirate, but now Gaban expresses the idea that those with the greatest expectations upon them often fall short. The ideas of destiny and inherited will are no stranger to the series, with us just having spent multiple chapters exploring them them through the lens of Zebek and the fated David clan, so it's pretty interesting for Oda to include this line from Gaban here, essentially bucking these concepts as a whole, almost as if reminding us that these people who are viewed as chosen ones or main characters are not the ones who will come out on top, and of course in the case of Ace, we know that to be true. In 1152, we saw a particular symbol on Shanks' left arm for the first time. Back then, we speculated that this may be a sign that he was a holy knight at some point, as it resembled a similar symbol that we saw on Killingham and Summers' armbands. These suspicions were confirmed recently when we learned that this was the mark of the Shanks Covenant, given to those who are considered devoted blades of God. Up until now, we assumed that this was simply a brand to signify the contract, and thought that it did not grant any powers from Emu, since Harald was not permitted to learn about the Great One until after he entered the Depths Covenant. But here, we learn from Shanks that even the lowest tier of contract holds some power, as it allows Emu to dictate orders that must be followed within a given range, although the person entering the contract does not really get anything in return. This explains why Shanks could not talk with Harald about a certain topic in the Holy Land, as first mentioned in 1152. We see that Shanks did end up meeting with Harald outside of Marishaw at some point in this brief flashback, where Harald recognizes Shanks as the captain of the Red Hair Pirates. We had initially thought Harald may have crossed paths with the Roger Pirates at some point and recognized Shanks from that, but it's interesting that Harald is familiar with Shanks' own pirate crew. We know that Shanks is looking to start his crew after Roger's execution, and saw him trying to recruit Yasopp as far back as 22 years ago, so it's no surprise that the Red Hair Pirates were active prior to 15 years in the past when Shanks and Harald met in 1167, but it does make me wonder if the crew was on the world government's radar before that. We do know that Cypher Pole was aware of the Red Hair Pirates at least 13 years ago at the latest, since they are shown recognizing the crew by their ship when the Gum Gum fruit was taken from them. It looks like Shanks met Harald out at sea sometime within the last year, but it seems as if Shanks had not become aware of the topic he wanted to discuss with Harald until relatively recently, or else they would have just been able to talk about it in the flashback that were shown of the two meeting. The idea of Shanks wanting to discuss something important with the king was what we left off on back in 1152, before getting a quick montage of Harald's supposed death, and here, it seems that what Shanks wanted to discuss was the dangers of entering the deeper contract. Shanks explains to Gaban that the Depths Covenant grants the user with increased strength and regenerative abilities, as well as the ability to spawn the Abyss pentagrams for travel, but in return, Emu was able to communicate with them telepathically and give them orders that cannot be refused, no matter the distance. And this makes a lot of sense, given what we understood to be Shanks' motivations for returning to the Holy Land. He joined as a devoted blade of God in order to learn more about the inner workings of the world government and the Holy Knights, and once he became aware of what a Depths Covenant entailed, he defected before he was forced to submit to Emu's contract. Also, while we figured Shanks was not privy to Emu since he did not stick around to enter into the Depths Covenant, it seems that he is at the very least aware of the concept of the Great One, as is Gaban now that Shanks shared this information. It also seems that the Holy Knight depicted here as an example of these abilities is supposed to be Shamrock, as the outfit, hairstyle, and weapon all very closely resemble his, which may even suggest that it was Shamrock who told Shanks about all these details in the first place, since we did see Shanks ask Shamrock for more insight into the Holy Land a few chapters ago. And while on the topic, it's rather interesting that Shamrock's outfit in the present day is much more closely aligned with what Shanks was seen wearing 14 years ago. There have been theories that the two switched places at some point, although I think those theories have been put to rest by now after we saw that Shanks likely had his eye scars back then as well. Since it's been revealed that even the Shanks Covenant allows Emu to exert some amount of control over the bearer, we're left to wonder if this power is confined to the mark on the arm or if it operates beyond any physical medium. That is to say, does Shanks losing his arm mean that he's no longer subject to Emu's control should he be within his range, or is he still under the threat of being possessed? People have been speculating for a while now if Shanks let his arm get eaten intentionally, and personally I'm not the biggest fan of the idea. I think it's a lot more impactful if it was truly a casualty that he incurred in his effort to save Luffy, but I do think it would be very interesting if Shanks believed he was free from Emu's grasp, only to end up being possessed later on in the story. Or who knows, maybe Shanks is aware that he's still subject to Emu's authority, and that's why he's not been able to go back into the Holy Land and take any action against the government. If the abilities of the Covenants are in fact limited by the mark being physically attached to the user, then it adds some more color to the scene of Summers getting his arm cut off by Gaban back in 1148. There, we initially saw that his left arm was getting severed, but in every subsequent depiction, he's shown with the right arm as the one that's missing. Now Summers bears the mark of the Depths Covenant on a band around his left arm, and also has some additional tattoos on his actual left arm that we still don't know the significance of, if any, so I wonder if Oda changing his mind about which arm was removed and updating it to be the one without the mark could suggest that there was a way to sever the contract with Emu, or maybe not, and we're just looking too deeply into a simple mistake that ends up getting fixed in the volume version of the chapter. One last note about the Shallow Covenant before moving on. Even though it allows Emu to control the bearer, it's interesting that Emu does not have to be involved when bestowing it upon someone. Harald was seen acquiring the symbol from the 5 elders, and Emu was only involved when it came to upgrading it to the Depths Covenant. Shanks and Gaban then pick up on a monstrous burst of Haki surging out of Alrust Castle. We had previously speculated that this Haki belonged to Emu, since we had seen a similar burst when they possessed Gunko earlier in the arc, but as we see here, it looks like this may have actually been from a clash between Loki and Harald. Just before this, we revisited the scenes from 1152 of Loki and Jarl arriving after being summoned, and learned that Harald is already acting out against his own men in an effort to obey Emu's command to mobilize the nation. It's rather interesting that Emu's authority is manifesting on its own rather than Emu directly controlling Harald. That is, throughout this chapter, we see that Harald is still himself, so to speak, instead of being a vessel for Emu to communicate through and possess like we saw with Gunko and Saturn. Initially, his actions are dissonant with his own thoughts, as he's able to order his men to kill him before it's too late, although that doesn't actually pan out on account of the regeneration, which makes me wonder if this actually is more of a curse than a boon. In granting immortality to their pawns, Emu prevents their pawns from freeing themselves from Emu's control, meaning it's practically impossible to back out of the Covenants, something to keep in mind for when we return to the Gunko subplot. Jarl and Loki subdue Harald, and in his last moments of sanity, Harald attempts to explain what is going on with him and how he was tricked by the world government. He wishes for the two to tell the truth to all of Elbaph, and for them to see him for the fool that he actually was, considering himself the worst king in Elbaph's history. Harald even tells Loki that he needs to take the throne and become Elbaph's hero by telling the nation that he defeated the previous king who had gone mad. We know that this would end up not being done, as in the present day, the nation reveres Harald as their greatest leader and despises Loki as their worst villain. It would seem that Jarl and Loki would go on to hide the truth of this day and Harald's mistake, and Loki would end up taking the blame for everything, as nobody would blink given his history of being a catastrophic troublemaker for the nation. This truth would be kept even from Hyrule, but I wonder if that was partially on account of Hyrule being unwilling to hear more after seeing the situation at face value. We had seen previously that Harald wanted both Hyrule and Loki to lead the nation into the future together, and I'm sure Harald would have told Hyrule to take the throne as well if he were present for this incident. But after this final request, it seems Harald's sanity has frayed completely, and he's fully acting in Emu's service. We get this panel of him stepping over the face of one of his soldiers, calling back to his first appearance in the flashback as he carelessly stomped on his own men just for his own amusement, really illustrating the tragedy in his character. After all of his development and growth over the course of 100 years, he's been forced back to where he started as a brute swinging around his stature. And actually looking closer, I wonder if this is supposed to be the same guard in both of these scenes. We also get the scene we've been waiting for of Harald stabbing Jarl through the forehead with his blade. This is something I called all the way back in chapter 1136 when we first saw that Harald's portrait showed him with the same sword that was stuck in Jarl's head. At the time, I speculated that there may be something more going on with Harald having fought against Jarl, and it's cool to see that theory play out. We learned that the sword is actually gifted to Harald by Jarl long ago, and I wonder if we'll get more insight into if this blade is supposed to be special, and I wonder if Usopp will have something to do with it in the present day. Gaban and Shanks had made their way to the castle as well, which is kinda interesting given that Harald ordered the entrances to be sealed just moments earlier. Perhaps Gaban is aware of secret passageways, just as he explained that he was aware of where Loki's key was being kept on account of his affinity for exploring. Or maybe the sheer size of Elbaph's architecture allows for smaller individuals to easily slip through cracks and crevices. In any case, the two of them are seemingly able to do some significant damage, even bringing Harald to the ground, but unfortunately, his regeneration allows him to get back up as if nothing happened. Now this whole time, Harald has been chasing down Loki, who he previously instructed to eat the devil fruit that has been passed down across Elbaph's generations, thinking it would be the only way for them to defeat him and his regeneration. However, since he lost himself to Emu's authority, he has now been trying to take not only the fruit for himself, but Ragnir as well. In previous breakdowns, I mentioned how Ragnir could be seen in that panel from 1152 just behind the treasure chest, and this is confirmed in this chapter as we get that scene recreated, albeit a little more clearly this time around. Back then, the silhouette that appeared before the chest was obscured and did not resemble Loki, making some wonder if there was even more foul play at hand, and perhaps a third party that got involved, like the Holy Knights. It appears another one of our theories came true here, as the chapter ends with the reveal that Ragnir is able to move on its own, as it attacks Loki immediately. We've speculated for a long time now that Ragnir may be the forbidden fruit of Elbaph, and while that may not be the complete story here, it does seem that Ragnir may have some sort of devil fruit for it to be moving on its own, specifically a Zoan. Given the dialogue throughout this chapter about how the forbidden fruit needed to be eaten, I think it's fair to say that there is another fruit inside the chest, and it does seem very likely that Loki ended up eating it, which would square with the idea of him being weakened by sea stone in the present day. Though I suppose there is some possibility that Ragnir ended up quote-unquote eating the fruit that was in the chest to begin with, but let's operate as if there are two separate fruits, and let's talk about Ragnir first. We've had a handful of examples of these objects with Zoans throughout the series thus far, with Lasso, Funkfried, Smiley, Bunbuku, and potentially Cerberus. While this was first attributed to a relatively recent discovery made by Vegapunk, it should be noted that the process for instilling a devil fruit into an inanimate object may not be limited to him or his technique, as Bunbuku, a teapot native to an isolationist nation like Wano, would likely not have come under his influence. It's been heavily speculated that only zones are able to be fed to inanimate objects, likely due to the idea of zones having their own wills, which begs the question, what fruit does Ragnir have? Well, in the present day, we did see that it had the ability to summon a large bolt of lightning from the clouds, which suggests that it may be a mythical zone with an elemental ability, much like Kaido's Azure Dragon Fruit being able to make use of flame and wind, or Yamato's mythical Wolf Fruit being able to make use of ice. Now, of course, the most well-known Norse myth involving lightning is Thor, the god of thunder, and while it would be pretty funny to see a human fruit variant eaten by an object, I do have some suspicions that it's more of a beastly zone, particularly because of the claw marks that we saw in the ruins of the throne room. And in particular, I believe that it may be Niddhoggr, the lightning dragon. In Norse mythology, the Niddhoggr is a serpentine beast that was said to gnaw at the roots of the world tree, Yggdrasil, and it has some association with storms on occasion depending on the source, but in particular in the world of One Piece, the Niddhoggr was written using the kanji for lightning dragon when it was first mentioned in chapter 1142 by the children of the Walrus School. This was the very same chapter that we first saw the abilities of Ragnir on display, as Loki used it to bring forth an incredible bolt of lightning from the sky. Perhaps coincidence, or maybe an intentional nod by Oda. And in a similar vein, at the end of that chapter, we get the scene of all the sleep tids, the nightmare spawned from Gilliam's abilities, and at the center is Loki with the largest sleep tid beside him, the lightning dragon, the Niddhoggr. Like I said, this could all just be coincidence, but we are definitely no stranger to looking too closely into things, and I think it's a fairly decent idea. I'd love to hear what you think this fruit could be, or if you think there's even a fruit in the hammer at all, maybe there's something else going on. With all that said, there is still another fruit that we can speculate on with the actual forbidden fruit of Elbaph itself. This fruit has been hyped up a lot, with the giant warrior pirate saying that Loki has the power to destroy the world, Rox including it as part of his grand plan to rule the world, specifically with respect to commanding the Goliath should Harald use it, and with this chapter, Harald claiming it would give Loki the ability to overcome Harald's immortality. It's pretty interesting how vague and disparate all these hints are, with the one potential through line being that the fruit is just generically very powerful. I think anything someone throws out there is as good as anything else, and I know that many have been hoping that this is actually the gum fruit. I've talked about the potential for that theory before, and I suppose it is still technically possible, although it would require Loki to not have actually eaten it. In any case, I'm pretty excited for what it could be, and I'm just hoping that it's a Paramecia or a Logia. Ragnir being the new mythical zone for this arc would be cool enough, and we don't really need another one on top of that. I'm skeptical that we'll find out what the forbidden fruit is or does in this flashback, as I feel like that may be something Oda wants to reserve for Loki to use in the present day. However, I do think we'll get to see Ragnir's abilities at the very least, just given the cliffhanger we're left on, so at least we can look forward to that. With that said, thank you so much for watching this video, and thank you for watching all of my videos in general. This is the last manga chapter of 2025, and I'm so grateful to have you still here along for the ride. I know there have been many ups and downs, especially recently, but I'm still committed to making the best weekly breakdowns that I can, and delivering the best videos for you all. I can't wait to continue down this journey with you in 2026. If you're new to the channel, or enjoyed this video and want to show your support, consider subscribing so you can get all of my videos as soon as they come out. The rest of my manga breakdowns can be found in the playlist in the description. Thank you so much for watching, stay safe, and I hope to see you in the next one.